Hey, everybody. Welcome back to SpinSheet Happy Hour.
Oh my gosh, it must be fall. Happy
I
Friday,
know.
everybody. Welcome back to SpinSheet Happy Hour. I haven't seen you guys in about 6 months.
It's
Well,
crazy.
I've seen you, but I haven't seen you on
Right, right.
Facebook. Anyway, yeah,
Uh, it's good to be back. Um, feels like we were just here, but
I know. It's,
uh,
it's feeling a little summery for fall, though, isn't it?
yeah, actually, a lot summery. Just kind of some wonky weather going on right now, but
Yeah. So,
everything is
well,
good.
we have an exciting show planned tonight. Those who are regular watchers of the Spin Sheet Happy Hour know that every once in a while we bring on Kristen Berry just because he's an entertaining guest, he's a good talker, and he always makes us laugh, and he's always fun, and he always says yes when I call him. So I thought he seemed like kind of the perfect first guest to launch the fall series of a Spin Sheet Happy Hour. So
Yeah.
anyway, Kristen is here. He's back in the green room getting a drink. And we thought we'd just sort of like welcome you guys. And Sharp, you had a few words you wanted to say.
Yes. So our friends at Mount Gay, we've been sponsoring us for a long time, at least for the Spin Sheet Happy Hour. They're going to shift their marketing with us, which is fine. Good. They've been good for the Spin Sheet Happy Hour, and they're going to try some other things. But I thought I'd leave their logo down there, just a freebie for them, even though they're not the official sponsor right now. And it's also because I have no idea how to get that logo off. But I do want to thank, we always want to thank Mount Gay. And of course, just because they're not sponsoring doesn't mean we don't have this aboard. So
Yeah.
that's nice. But
Well, and keep in mind that they are still the longtime sponsor of the racing section of Spin Sheet, which is really still the biggest media section of any of our three magazines. And we thank them for their longtime sponsorship of that, as well as all the other fun stuff that they do with us, such as the racing results email and stuff like that. So thanks to Mount Gay. But, let's talk a little about Spin Sheet. Big year next year.
It's our anniversary.
It's our 30-year anniversary in 2025. 30-year anniversary. Over the hill.
Wow.
I know it's going to be really exciting. We're not quite sure what we're going to do for it. We're discussing that and some of the things we can do to engage our readers.
Yep.
If you guys have any ideas, we always welcome them. You can always send them over to editor@spinsheet.com. Tell us something you'd like to see for SpinSheet's 30-year anniversary.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an exciting year. There's no doubt about it. We just don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
So that's on our Monday meeting agenda.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here, guys. Should we bring on Kristen and talk about some dumb moments in sailboat racing and what we learned from them?
Absolutely. Hey, KB.
Oh my gosh. That's so
Thank
cool.
you. We want you to
great.
take a picture of that and send it to us. It could be the beginning of the congratulations for making it 30 years.
Oh my gosh. And by the way, 30 better not be over the hill.
Yeah.
Big trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wish it were my 30th birthday, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We could we're gonna have a lot of fun next year. It's fun to celebrate.
My 30s were great years. So I'm sure this is that's a good harbinger of things to come for the whole Spin Sheet media empire.
Yeah. So before we get started and talking about racing and sailing mistakes on the water, let's talk about what you're drinking over there, Chris Charbonneau. You're in the Spin Sheet World headquarters by yourself. I understand.
I am. It's
everyone sort of took the day off and went somewhere else. And so what's happening over there? What are you drinking?
Well, I won't tell you what time I started drinking. I'm kidding. But what I discovered is a big surprise. We don't have any rocks glasses in the office, which just floors me. So I'm drinking out of the coffee mug, which I do often. But I'm drinking Mount Gay XO on the rocks, as I like to. And I'm enjoying
it. KB, what's happening over there at your house?
Chris, now I know why the coffee's so good at SpinSheet.
It is delicious.
Your cups. Because every time I come over there and get a cup of coffee, I always think this tastes amazing. I've been making some homemade kombucha, and I did a little Mount Gay and homemade kombucha tonight. And this one must have had a little ginger in it. It's got a little nip or a little bite at the end of it. It's quite tasty.
That's fancy.
That's right.
What are you drinking, Miles?
Well, I'm just drinking bubbly water out of a wine glass because that's kind of what I had available right now. So
we get it. Okay.
I'll have wine with dinner later.
Okay.
Bubbly
Anyway,
water,
cheers, guys.
Yeah, cheers.
Bubbles go right to my head.
Yep, there you go.
So I don't see any reader comments yet, so I'm not sure if anybody's watching. I hope they are, but please put your comments in anytime. You can put in a question for Kristen in the comments anytime, and we're just going to sort of address them as we go along. We have a little bit of a script that we're going to follow, but we'll interrupt it with reader questions at any time. And especially if you'd like to share one of your on the water mishaps and what you learned from it, and maybe get some input from a longtime sailing coach. So, Kristen, for anyone who might be watching who doesn't know, and by the way, Sharp, I'm going to keep you on here, so maybe you can share one of your mishaps, unless you want to go back in the green room. But
yeah, I'll stick around.
But Kristen, for anyone who isn't familiar with you, you don't have to start from the very beginning of your very first sailing mishap yet. But maybe you can just give us 1 minute about what you do and why we should pay attention to anything you have to say about sailing or sailboat racing.
Well, Molly, I'm very proud to be the dumbest sailor you know. And so I was overqualified for this presentation quite clearly. If there's a mistake that can be made, I probably have in my 20 plus years of experience as a full-time sailing educator based here in Annapolis, Maryland. My job is I help people reach their sailing goals. And in doing so, I get to get out there and have some pretty interesting experiences because failing is part of learning. And I've fortunately made a lot of mistakes in my own sailing, and I'm happy to share them, which I think is part of my coaching shtick, is that I don't know it all, and I'm happy to be along for the ride with everybody else. So anyway, I do think I've seen some pretty duh moments, many of which I've been the leader of. So I'm uniquely qualified for tonight's presentation.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't have a dumb moment? I personally have fallen overboard a lot at the dock. Back when I used to teach sailing, I get all excited and I'd be in the middle of explaining something and I would just step backwards usually off the boat. And so that was sort of the beginning of the does for me, but I've had a lot of them on the water too, a lot. I can think of one in particular, and I was in the Midwest and I was like, oh, this breeze is picking up here. Of course, it meant a storm was coming, but I was like, oh, it's a breeze. So, I hopped in the boat and, I don't even remember what it was. It was some version of a sunfish, if not a sunfish, by myself. I was visiting some friends in Indiana on this lake and went out and I'm jamming. I'm having a great time. And big gust came and no stopper knot in the main sheet. And so, lots of flailing, major gust. I worked it out. I got it back together. My friend's mother was so mad at me when I got back to shore because the storm had really hit in earnest by then. And she watched the whole mishap from the porch thinking I was the dumbest person in the world, which, probably was, but probably it could have been a tornado and I was out there in a sunfish flailing around.
Right. That sounds like good wind,
Yeah. How about you, Sharb?
I think I told you, I've never been a huge racer, so I'm not going to give you a racing story, but I think it's pretty good. I went out with my dad one time after being gone for a while, and we went out sailing and wind died and we said, let's just go back in. We're on our way back. And the mast and the boom really was just at my eye level, and I did not see the shoal marker, and I ran the boat aground. To which my dad went berserk, like, how could you miss it? And we were like pretty much next to the marker. It was a really, bad mistake on my part, but we ended up, calling for tow, get us off there. And funny enough, they knew exactly who my dad was because they had pulled him off the same damn thing. They were like, "Hey, is that you?"
Hey, Sharp, how are you?
Yeah.
One day. Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, Dad, way to go." Yeah. Anyway, that was a dumb moment, though.
All right, Chris, do you remember your first or an early one back in your teenage years?
Which one of us?
You.
Me. Well, well, I don't want to go back that far. But Molly, your story about the wind reminds me of a very important one, especially for people that are preparing for the Annapolis to Newport race this year. We had exited the Chesapeake Bay and had a rip-roaring ride down the bay. I was leading a J World racing team for this one. So students on board, my co-director, Jeff Jordan, and I were leading the boat, and we had exited the bay. We're doing quite well in the race. And there had been all of these alerts and all sorts of chatter on the radio about this incredible storm that was making its way across Virginia and into Southern Maryland, and clearly was sort of headed right for us. But we were trying to win that darn race. And so, there's no wind. We're basically becalmed. And for some reason, I decided that was a great time to have all of the sails up. And we could see the storm building on the horizon, that sort of classic anvil shape. And I'm thinking, in fact, I've gone so far as to say it out loud. Normally in a situation like this would be a perfect time for us to quickly put in the reef. There's no wind anyway. We should reef the sails, make sure that we've got that down pat, and be stepping down into maybe even the storm jib so that we're ready for anything that comes. But of course, even in saying that, there I was, full sails up, when the first little cold finger of wind flew across my ear. And I knew we're in big trouble. I was like, get them down right now, get them all down. And next thing you know, this black fist of God comes rolling across the mirror-like surface of the Atlantic Ocean and hits us with a 60-knot squall line. Full sails up, everything going. And we were sailing in a J120, which went from being perfectly vertical, everybody sleeping down below, except for the three of us in the cockpit, to on its beam ends, ripping across the ice rink of the water, completely keel out of the water, mast in, going sideways for about a minute. Long enough, in fact, for Jeff Jordan to poke his head up and say, well, how about that reef? And then he said, anybody need a sandwich? And then he went down below. And while all that was happening, the mainsail literally departed from the mast. It ripped off at its masthead, and we started plinking off the luff slides that hold the sail on. And once the storm had passed, we were pretty wounded, and I spent the next 6 hours sewing the main back together while the rest of the boats were racing to Newport. So that was one of the dumbest, ignoring the weather moments of my life, driven mostly by greed and competitiveness rather than seamanship and smarts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, now that we've established our expertise,
Right.
yeah. Let's talk. Chris and I called you earlier in the week and said, how would you like to structure this? So how do you look at in you being you? Just shot off like 5 different ways that you looked at mistakes on the water. So I put them together and so that I wouldn't forget any of them. So you gave me 4 sort of mishaps off the top of your head. And you said user error of omission, error of commission, and compounding complications. So you talked a bit about the domino effect of mistakes. So let's start with user error, because all of our stories involved user error.
Sure.
Can you give an example or 2 maybe of other user errors, and readers feel free to throw in your own. I see that Heidi, hi Heidi. I see that Heidi has thrown one into the comments there, but you don't have to monitor those, Chris, and I'll keep my eye on them, and we'll get back to you, Heidi. But if you want to just sort of bring up some of the ones that you see common user error on boats, because things like we did, like Sharp, you might run aground again, but you're probably going to have a little bit better situational awareness about where the mark is, right? And I haven't forgotten a stopper knot in a main sheet for a very long time, and certainly if I hop on a little boat, so one of the first things I obsess about. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, sure. I've got 3 user error tales that all sort of tell a little bit of a different story. And they won't chew up too much time. The first one, of course, is that almost everybody I know on the Chesapeake Bay in particular who runs aground does so usually while looking at the chart plotter. And that is a product of 2 things. Either one, it's the new toy and they're digging deep into the pages of all the data and information, and they're looking at the wrong thing when they run aground. Or it's possible that they have set the depth to the wrong setting. You know, the tools allow you to manipulate them in many ways. And if you don't understand that manipulation, you can set yourself up for failure. So if you set it so that it's reading depth of the water, but you think it's depth under the keel, and you can't understand why the boat's not moving forward when the depth meter still says 6, you may have a setting issue. So running aground in the Chesapeake in particular is oftentimes a product of shiny new toy syndrome, in my experience. So then kind of related to that, lots of us have had duh moments where we install something on the boat, but don't fully understand the electrical process maybe. So for instance, I once ripped out an entire bilge pump system, hoses, pumps, switches, and everything, and put it all back in, and it still didn't work. And then I realized I never checked the fuse, and it was a 5-set fuse that was burned out in the system, and I had jumped to this conclusion. Not so long ago, I was sailing on a very large and sophisticated boat with a very complicated Starlink-based communication system, and we couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. We ordered new routers and new cables and all sorts of things. And once again, there was a on-off switch somewhere in the system that we hadn't found and flicked. That was a pretty duh moment. So, those are big. And then back to my best friend, Jeff Jordan, thinking about some of our adventures when we were together at J-World. We went to Key West for Key West Race Week one year, and we were using the Stock Island facility to put our boats in the water. We had 5 J80s that we were running, and we had worked all day to put the J80s together. And then we were getting ready to finish the day and leave when we realized that we had put up the masts inside a box of wires that would prevent us from driving the boats to the crane that would put them in the water. And so in a flurry, we had to, what had taken all day, we had to do in an hour to drop rigs, move boats, put the rigs back up, and get them in the water. So those are some key examples of bonehead moves and duh moments.
So like in the user error department, do you think a lot of those things you only make that mistake once? Like, can you think of that you might make again and again, and you're like, I can't believe I just did that again, you know?
Well, I think that's why you have significant others and crewmates, to remind you of the last time you made that mistake and hopefully give you the perspective that's necessary to not make it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, part of it is, to be quite honest, kind of putting the coaching hat on for a minute, is that if you tend to make similar mistakes, it's a process issue, and you need to have some sort of a check in your process that gets you to pause, observe, and look around. So in my sail coaching, I oftentimes talk about the SOTA loop. This was something we came up with on an Atlantic crossing, which is sail, observe, decide, act. And if you slow down in your process and you sail for a minute and say, all right, what do we want to change? What do we need to do differently? and then you observe where you are in your settings or what the conditions are. Then you make a decision about what you want to do, and then you act, and then you sail again. It slows you down long enough to hopefully shortcut or short circuit where you would make an error of your own making in that situation. So sometimes slowing down, you can win.
So let's, while we're here, before we shift gears at all, let's answer Heidi's question. What are your thoughts about the mark rounding you witnessed during the J30 North Americans this past September? Sounds like a little inside story you have with Heidi.
Well, it's available for everybody to see on the internet. I actually didn't just witness it. I actually shot some video of it. And, you know, it was a pretty typical Chesapeake sailing day, light breezes, sailable, but light, and strong current, and a very active, aggressive one design fleet making their way to a windward mark. Most of the boats got there at pretty much the same time. And then some hilarity ensued. Good sailing and bad behavior is sort of how I would describe it. You know, or bad sailing and worse behavior, maybe. I don't know. You'll have to watch the video and come to your own conclusion on that. Yeah. But basically, there were some errors that were made by some moments made by some sailors who either allowed their competitive desire to get in the way of their rules knowledge. And then sometimes some people thought they were doing the right thing and immediately found out they weren't, and had a hard time making an exit. To Heidi's credit, though, I do want to say that that windward mark was not everybody else's shining moment, but for her team on the Suzy Q, it was a very shining moment because they were in a bad situation. They were in a really bad situation, and instead of pushing that bad situation, they found the nearest exit, and in doing so, ended up doing fairly well overall in the situation because they were able to escape what was a kerfuffle at the top.
Yeah.
And they sailed away. So my thoughts are that you can oftentimes win by sailing around the problem rather than into it.
Yeah. And for anyone who follows Kim Carranz's columns in SpinSheet, she recently wrote one, gosh, I can't remember the name of it, where she discussed getting into situations like that. And, you know, sometimes keeping your distance from it and sailing away from it, not being in the middle of the crunch will benefit you because you keep your boat speed up or whatever the case may be. So she's written a bunch of them. Put them all up on spinsheet.com. So I hope we answered your question, Heidi. Feel free to follow it up. Let's talk about errors of omission. Can you think of any errors of omission?
Well, yes. And so, you know, I think most of the folks know that I'm a Midwestern born sailor. I kind of grew up in the sort of Indiana Bobby Knight basketball culture. And this is something that's sort of born out of that old school mentality, which is that if you fail to do your homework and have a failure because of that, you really don't have any good excuses there. That is like the worst kind of error you can make. And so, you know, here again, thinking about sailors, I just sailed in the J22 World Championship last week, an amazing event put on by the Eastport Yacht Club, and Kristen Robinson was the driving force behind all of that. And we had 4 incredible days of racing and really exciting sailing. It was awesome. But there were clearly teams that were making errors of omission by not studying the current. You know, the weather every day is different, and we forecast, and we're getting better in that forecast, but we don't have enough information to be able to be super accurate. We can kind of put ourselves in the ballpark, but then we've got, you know, we have to be more observant. Forecasting current and tidal information is much more accurate, and we can, because of the way it works, look far into the future and know what's going to be affecting our race course. So, you know, if you're thinking about sailing a spring regatta in Annapolis, you can be making your current strategy tonight by looking at what the current is forecasted to be, and then building a plan around that. Well, at the J22 Worlds, there were definitely some teams that were not thinking about the current, and it was a dominant factor in the environmental consideration of the race course every day. That's an error of omission, and they were punished accordingly.
Yeah.
Occasionally myself included.
Yeah.
So yeah, things you could know. I'll give you another one. I actually had one yesterday. I left the dock in my coach boat, knowing that I had taken some of the safety equipment off to have to replace a fire extinguisher and whatnot. And I left not thinking about putting that stuff back on. I pulled out of SSA's basin and was immediately stopped by a very, very polite team of Coast Guard folks who inspected the vessel and let me know that I did not, in fact, have all of my safety equipment. And I said, but it's right there on the dock. And they said, but it's supposed to be right here on the boat. And that was an error of omission, for which I got a nice little pink piece of paper souvenir. And that's a perfect example of the type of errors that can easily be avoided. There's a book that I recommend to all of my sailing friends and customers, which is the Checklist Manifesto. And I'm not a big.
I don't know this book, the Checklist Manifesto.
Oh my gosh, it doesn't have anything to do with sailing, but it was written for sailors because one, it takes what many of us would find to be really, boring and not something we want to have as part of our loose goose lifestyles, and makes it cool. And that's the checklist. And you can do your pre-departure checklist in about 30 seconds on a sailboat, confirming that you have all your safety equipment.
Yeah.
Had I done that, I have that checklist on my boat, and I just didn't do my checklist, and that's what got me into trouble. So, and not serious trouble. The Coast Guard was amazing and very polite and helpful. So, but it happens to all of us because we make errors of omission. We don't do the things that we know we need to do, and then we are found out because of it. Happens all the time.
So I see that Pete Boland, who does the Sail Faster podcast, has joined us. And welcome, Pete. And we're glad you're here. Anyone who has been reading SpinSheet lately knows that he's been providing an extract from his interviews and doing a page in SpinSheet about that, and we've loved them. And he saw that we were doing this show tonight, Kristen, and I know that he has done an episode with you, which it seems that I'm one of the only sailors in the United States who has not listened to that episode from what I hear from you. But Pete sent me a note, and he said, my common mistake in my dumb moment is being intimidated by the top of the fleet boats yelling at me, even when we have the right of way. Can you address that? Are you familiar with that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I witness that all the time. And, one, shame on the yellers. It's not necessary, and it's a form of bullying. And there are a lot of sailors who do it. And when we witness it, we should stand up to it. And I wish I had done that more often. And I make it a point to do it now. You can just grab somebody by the elbow later and say, that wasn't cool. And that can go a long way. But also there's a little lesson for Pete in that, which is when you go racing at whatever level you want to race at, you need to be comfortable with your rules knowledge at that level. And so, your reputation is the most important thing in your sailing bag. And if you have the reputation of being a shrinking violet who can be barked off of a situation that is marginal or not, then you are making kind of a duh error there. So you either need to increase the confidence in your rules knowledge, the willingness to defend your space and possibly move forward with the adjudication process that is the protest process, or make sure you're fast enough that there's nobody there to yell at you. So there's a lot of things to work on there.
Well, and I can't help but think that maybe Pete, maybe it's the sort of polite British guy in you. And what you really need to do is kind of like when you're out hiking and you encounter a bear on the trail and you just need to make yourself bigger, starboard.
Or, Molly, I think bear spray on boats might be an interesting idea. But I
That
think
might
you're
have
on
helped
to something.
Heidi. That might have helped Heidi in the J30s event, right?
Yeah. Big
All right,
club.
great. I'm glad you're here, Pete. I see that Betty Caffo is here too. Betty hails from Havre Grace, and she has written a neat article in the current issue of SpinSheet in the November issue about returning to racing for different reasons after having retired. And I liked it because it's a unique twist. People tell us that they've retired from racing all the time. We don't hear about too many who are like, you know what, we're going back. So it's a really good story. I encourage you guys to find it in the November issue of SpinSheet, and feel free to keep your questions coming in the comments.
Welcome back, Betty. Glad you're back racing. That's cool.
Yeah, and Betty's also she's a regular on the SpinSheet Happy Hour, so we very much appreciate Betty and Ara watching our shows.
Hey, so before we move off from this for a second,
Yeah,
I saw something else that Pete said in the chat that's actually that's related to the errors of omission statement here, which is that many people, whether they're racers or cruisers, you don't have to be a racer for this to be an issue by any means, but they sail the forecast rather than sailing the conditions. That is a form of an error of omission. So if you didn't know the forecast, if you showed up without having any anticipation of what conditions you'd be sailing in, that would be a big error of omission. That would be a mistake. But if you aren't constantly updating your assumptions and checking to make sure that what you think is going to happen is happening, that's another form of omission. And so with current in particular, the forecast says that the slack tide, therefore slack current, is going to happen at such and such a time. The switch is going to happen. Why hasn't that already occurred? And if you just rely upon the current forecast rather than any on the water observations, you may get duped. You may be found, it may not go in your favor. And I think that goes to the final error of omission that all of us in sailing can sometimes fall victim to, which is we stop learning. So if you think you know it all, you don't. And if you stop trying to learn and be observant, something bad will ultimately happen. And maybe not terrible, but something unsuccessful will happen.
yeah.
So again, during the J22 Worlds, we saw this. They put the Racecourse in kind of a non-traditional location on 2 of the days. And some of the current knowledge that we would base local knowledge on wasn't completely accurate, or we had to make adjustments to it because the current doesn't switch in, as a line across the Chesapeake Bay. It changes on the edges and then moves into the deeper water. And so we really had to be observant. And that's part of what makes sailing so cool, is that unlike every other aspect of our lives, we have to be completely present in order for sailing to be done at its best.
Yeah.
And that's a really good reminder of it.
Yeah, and honestly, the one of the things I like so much about what Pete is doing with his Sail Faster podcast is the whole thing was born of him wanting to learn more about sailboat racing, and he's sharing it with everybody, and it's a hit. So thank you, Pete, for doing that. So let's move on to errors of commission, as you say, commission. My first thought was a jury rigging gone wrong. Did I assess that definition well? Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's a perfect example. If at the end of the incident, somebody says to you, well, what did you think was going to happen? You have made an error of commission, and it can be something as simple as you tried to fix something that requires a mechanical connection with glue, or you had a maneuver that you tried that didn't work out because it was never going to work out. There wasn't enough space for that to happen, or enough speed, or you were going too fast, whatever the case may be. So errors of commission are errors, in my view, that you can learn the most from, because you had a reason for why you did what you did, but it didn't work out the way you wanted it to.
Yeah.
And so because of that, errors of commission, at least from a coach's standpoint, are highly forgivable. And, you can see this in all levels of sport when, especially, younger players trying to do something that maybe is beyond their ability or their experience or their knowledge. And it doesn't go the way they thought it was going to, but they had a really good reason for it. And usually that reason is something that can be built upon. So errors of commission are my favorite. They're fun, even if sometimes they're the most embarrassing. Because, you thought it should work. I've always thought there could be an entire ad campaign for JB Weld or the hot glue gun. Either one of those two things could have an epic ad campaign where they just show things that people thought they could fix with a hot glue gun. My mom could fix almost everything with a hot glue gun, but you're not going to fix a broken marriage with a hot glue gun. You're not going to fix an airplane wing with a hot glue gun. You're not going to get the alternator to stay stuck to the engine with a hot glue gun. But you tried. And so that's sort of, a typical error of commission in my view.
And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, did you drive past Sharp's house and watching him trying to fix the roof of his wife's car? Because he is famous for fixing things.
Yes.
He's good at it too, but sometimes it gets interesting.
Yeah, well, sailors are famous for, duct tape and baling twine and bubblegum fixes that, make it to the end of the race. I was once doing a Chicago to Mackinac race on a Santa Cruz 70. Big boat, powerful, lots of loads. We were ripping across the lake, pointed right at Point Betsy on a power reach. Everything was great. And bang, the headboard broke off of the top of the main and the mainsail fell down. And there we are standing in a pile of 3D sailcloth and not sure what to do next. And on this particular boat, we had a chef, which that's not a very common experience for my sailing, but it was a really nice one to have.
Yeah.
And he came out of the companionway with a cutting board, a Lexan cutting board. We had this tool called a roto-zip. It's like a router with a cutting blade on it. He roto-zipped the cutting board in half. We slapped it on with some glue and screws. We had a new headboard. We were racing within minutes. And that's just one of those classic, fix with what you got kind of things.
Yeah.
But he later told us that as a trained paramedic in wilderness medicine, he had a wilderness first responder and wilderness medicine training, that he went through the boat prior to our departure and thought of all the things he could use for splints, for, non-intended purposes, off-brand purposes. And he had thought that the headboard or the cutting board could be used anytime we would need something stable like that. So that was pretty cool to see that he had been forward thinking while the rest of us were sitting there going, well, I guess this race is over.
It sounds like a very useful guy to have on board.
Yeah, and he made a hell of a souffle while underway. I mean, that was incredible,
Amazing. So I got a couple of examples on email. I didn't get many, but Jonathan Napini is a guy I know who is down at the Solomons, down at Southern Maryland Sailing Association. He is not new to sailing, but he's new-ish to sailing, but he loves it. He's a SpinSheet Century Club member. He'd been racing for a couple years on someone else's boat, and he's new to being a boat owner. And he sent me one that said, last month I had the boat out for a fun race. I was having a great day with a nice string of winds. I went to douse the spinnaker when all of a sudden the boom slowly sank into the water. I quickly assessed the situation and realized that my jib halyard / forestay tensioner that holds the rig up had come uncleated, let the mast lean back about 15 degrees and jump off the mast step.
Oh my gosh.
I typically tied into a backup horn cleat to avoid that possible problem, but I was in a rush to get off the dock, slipped my mind. I was saved from going all the way down by a stopper knot. With a quick assist from a friend on the safety boat, we were able to get the mast back on the step, and I got back in the race. Total user error on my part, he said. Lesson learned. Always run down my boat prep checklist, even when I'm in a hurry. So
there we go.
Yeah. So he he confirmed what you have to say about checklists. And the other one, the other story that he told, and it's a little bit long, but I'll shorten it a little bit. But he, his tiller handle split well underway, and it split where it was glued together. It was hanging on by a thread. They very carefully sailed the boat back in, and the handle totally fell off just as I got to the dock. Thankfully, it was just a quick epoxy and a couple of wood screws, and I was back out on the water the next day. But still frustrating to have to retire from a race when he was doing so well. So, equipment failure gets in the way of a good day sometimes. It's not always your fault, but it does happen. Can you think of?
Well, Molly, I'm gonna challenge.
Failure?
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge you on that.
Okay.
Equipment failure is your fault. We're cheap as a sales team. And so oftentimes we'll look at something and say, it's good enough for another day, when we know that it was probably due for either routine maintenance or replacement. Yeah. And so most failures were preventable and probably predictable, because things on a sailboat are consumable and they have a useful life and a regular replacement schedule that should be honored. And, not to put on too serious of a hat, but certainly your critical systems deserve to have a critical eye. So when you're preparing for even just a day sail, but certainly a coastal cruise or even just a trip to St. Mike's, making sure that you check the things that are most important to prevent that from happening, that is critical. And whether you do that with a checklist or some sort of routine check-in period, you need to be looking at that stuff, because almost all of those things show signs of failure before they actually fail. Mm-hmm. And so, that's back on the air of omission, oftentimes. And certainly we can think of things that failed without any warning, but that's pretty rare. And with modern materials and whatnot, things are more and more durable and easier to use than they've ever been, which sometimes leads us to making errors of user error or errors of commission, where we make things lighter and lighter and lighter until they become ridiculous and won't function within their intended use case. So,
well, let's talk about your fourth type of duh moment that resonated with me, just because things escalate quickly on a boat. One thing leads to another. What did you call them? Compounding complications.
Yeah.
Can you address that one?
Sure. The easiest place to start with a compounding complication is when we don't have established go, no-go parameters. So, especially sailing teams, I'm talking to you, husband and wife, partner to partner teams. If you haven't stated what the go, no-go comfort zone is, you are setting yourself up for making an error that can have a real negative impact in your long-term sailing experience. So with a lot of the teams that I work with, we agree upon what the wind cap will be, what the temperature cap will be, what the probability for thunderstorm activity will be. And if the forecast that we use suggests that we will be in excess of our agreed upon go, no go caps, we no go, or we change our plan. So, that becomes really, really important, because if you leave the dock in the morning on the Chesapeake Bay and it's like 8 knots out of the southeast, it feels awesome. But at 3:00, it's going to be blowing 16 in a good sea breeze with a strong chance of thunderstorm activity building over Virginia and then making its way to the bay. That may not be the best day to go to Solomon's Island, and so I think that we make these decisions based upon what we see right outside of the cockpit in this very moment, that oftentimes lead us into a place where things get real tricky real fast. And so that's a basic example of a compounding problem, where You picked the wrong direction to go the wrong way.
I have to ask just because I saw a little look on his face. Chris Charbonneau, do you have a little experience with your sailing partner and partner in life and her?
Well, that's it. No, I'm not going there.
Her comfort zone for go, no go.
No, never had a problem whatsoever. Don't even go there.
That's because you agree to her parameters, right?
Exactly. I know who's smarter than me.
Well, in all seriousness, there's 3 positions anybody can have on a boat. You can be a participant, you can be a passenger, or you can be a prisoner. And I think it's really important that we make sure that whoever has the lowest threshold still feels like a participant through the entire experience. And so you always have to manage to whatever that is. You can have incredible sailing experiences. It doesn't really limit you. It just informs you on, where you want to go and how you want to get there and when you have to leave and so on and so forth. And if everybody feels heard in those, then the limitations tend to float up instead of getting more restrictive. Because what'll happen is somebody will say, oh, I have a 15 knot wind cap if we're going to be sailing upwind. Fair enough. That's not that much fun. And then you say, okay, well, it's going to be 16 knots today, so we're not going, but we can go out for a few hours. And you go sailing, and then somebody says, well, what's the wind at right now? And they say, oh, it's 14 knots. And then somebody will say, I think we can do 16. I'm feeling good right now, right? And that's how you slowly expand your limitation factor, by building comfort rather than forcing it on somebody.
Yeah. Can you think of an example or two? And it doesn't have to have happened to you, but something that falls into the compounding complications category.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been some pretty tough stories of people who have ultimately lost their lives or had the loss of a boat that was a product of compounding decision making that was faulty and not good. And I don't like to dwell on those things, but I think there's some learning to be done. A lot of it has to do with experience level, just not knowing when you're over your head, and then when you get into a situation that is well beyond your knowledge and experience base, you don't know what to do next. So I was recently helping a couple improve their close quarters boat handling. They'd had a bad docking situation where they had made an error they'd left the dock. It was like no wind at all, and didn't realize or didn't pay attention to the fact that it was forecast to build to 20 knots in the afternoon. And their slip was perpendicular to the wind direction. So it was going to be a difficult entry in 20 knots of wind. And rather than using the forecast to inform when they should get back with their level of experience, they stayed out, had a great time sailing in the 20 knots of wind, and then got home and had a real problem getting into the slip, which nobody got hurt. The boat might have gotten a little bump or something like that, but not that big of a deal. But it really shook their confidence to the level of limiting their sailing for quite some time. Now, they were told by somebody, hey, there's this guy who knows how to dock pretty well and can help you create a system. And I came in and we waited for a 20 knot day so that we could go do it in the conditions that they sailed in or were docking in. And that helped solve it. But that's a pretty common example as well of, first decision was not coming in at the right time. And then that led to a bad thing, which then ultimately, and hear me, all sailors and powerboaters out there, led to the compounding problem that is most common for many of us, which is when we get into trouble, we add power. And so while they were coming into the slip, things were starting to go sideways. Instead of bailing out, going around and trying again, they added power, which dramatically added to the bang factor of the outcome.
Right.
And that was preventable. That was avoidable, and had been avoidable from that morning. let alone in that moment. And so
Yeah,
I think that's without, going down the dark rabbit hole of talking about how people get in real trouble at sea, that's a pretty common example. You can hear it at the fuel dock. You can hear it around the dock. When the engine revs, somebody is telling everybody out loud, I'm task saturated. I'm over my head.
yeah, right. I'm a big fan of the bailout in docking situations if it's available to you.
Yeah. I learned that from one of my sailors at the Naval Academy, who went on to be a Navy pilot. She came back a couple of years after having been one of the sailors that I worked with there. And she said, it was amazing to figure out at sailing something that applied on an aircraft carrier approach, which is if it doesn't look perfect, you don't use fancy pilot stuff to land the plane. You go around. And the same thing goes for docking and departing. If it doesn't look right, you go around. And if you can't get in that day, you should have a bailout plan, right? You should go to the T head slip and say you'll move in the morning. Go to a mooring ball, for crying out loud. If it's that dusty, drop your anchor and wait an hour. Whatever the case may be, there's lots of ways to not compound the problem, I guess.
Yeah. Betty made a comment. You said something about reefing, and she said, to Kristen's point, one of us says, she and her husband sail together. One of us says, maybe we should reef. We do it. After a bit of misery we encountered once. And I remember
that is a great rule.
we used to teach students, if you think about reefing, that means it's time to reef. If you think, maybe we should put a reef in, just put a reef in. Yeah. And of course, it's different for racing sailors, but
putting that coaching hat on for a minute, there's going to be a day in the spring. Everybody's coming out and they got their boat ready to go. They want to go sailing and it's Chesapeake Bay. There's no wind that day. Put your sails up at the dock, put the reef in, take the reef out, get it so that you can reef within 60 seconds or 90 seconds, get your system wired on those days that you can't otherwise go sailing. And that way, when you need it, it's ready to go. Have everything marked, and that'll dramatically improve your fun factor. And for you racers out there, I dare you to go sail your boat with the reef in when it's windy. Most of your boats will perform better with a reef than they won't. So
yeah, and definitely be more comfortable. Easier to shake it out than it is to put it in, right?
That's right.
Let's I'm going to skip ahead because we're already at last call time. But I don't even know if you remember this, KB, but you were on my panel one time for a Start Sailing Now seminar. And, we had a guy in the front row who was like the perfect student, raising his hand. And he asked, how do I take every sailing class that you could possibly take so that I can get the equivalent of a master's degree in sailing as fast as possible? How do I achieve that? And he was, high achieving, probably a DC lawyer, a super high achieving guy wants to learn fast as humanly possible. And you gave a great answer. Do you remember your answer? You used the word experiential in it, and I love your answer.
Yeah, no, I have kind of a canned response for that. Working at J World for years, we created students with high recidivism rates. They wanted to come back and be in the jailhouse as often as possible. But I always thought it was important to blend your structured learning, which is what you get from a course and a certification, with experiential learning, which is what you get by going sailing on your own. And a good coach knows that they need material to mold and work with within the structure of our courses or our syllabus or our practice plan for the day. And so I would always tell somebody like that you take your basic keelboat course or your ISA 101, then you need to go sail 4 to 10 days before you take the next class. Because without that, you really aren't prepared to be anything more than a paper tiger. You may know all the answers on the test, but without the actual time on the water. And that's why sailing is such an interesting sport in today's world, which is it runs counter to the way we use time. We need to spend more, most people want to be able to fit their activity in a 45-minute workout, but you can't get the mainsail cover off in that amount of time and get off the dock. It really requires us to think about time differently than we generally do. And sailing rewards time because there's multiple pathways to getting good at it. You can take the structured learning path and learn a lot of knowledge, but you'll never fully be as good of a sailor as you can be without matching that knowledge with time. Or you can spend an awful lot of time and learn sailing through the hard knocks of mistakes and just experience, but you'll never be as good of a sailor as you can be without the benefit of some structured content. And so it really requires a blended learning pathway to make the most of it.
Well,
did I tell the answer the way you wanted it?
Because I was thinking that, I mean, you can't get through any sailing without your dumb moments, which is what I was getting at, that, that experience part of it, that it leads you right into it. And so if you fear them so much, then you're never going to get any better at it, but well, hopefully you will have fewer of them as time goes by. I mean, that's the goal, right?
It's a coaching tactic of mine is, especially if we're doing docking and departing drills, is somebody comes in and has the perfect docking. Now, being a Indiana boy, you always want to leave the gym on a swish, right? So normally I'd say, all right, that one was perfect. Let's call it a day. But oftentimes we'll come into the dock, perfect landing, we'll tie up, and then I'll say, okay, let's go again. And as they start to go forward, I step off the boat. Now they have the opportunity to go do it on their own under supervision. But this is an opportunity for that mess up, that duh moment, that can you do it when the coach isn't at the backstay whispering in your ear? That's so critical to success. And when they come back in and have the perfect landing on their own, it's a massive confidence booster. So,
no kidding.
And look, sailing rewards experimentation, sailing rewards failure, sailing rewards a willingness to try. And we oftentimes, especially early in our sailing careers, want to get it right. But there is no right in the fluid environment of sailing. There's only the space to try and make it better. Good enough is neither good nor enough. So even if it felt perfect this time, I bet it could be better next. And we just have to keep trying.
Yeah. Well, I've talked to so many sailors after a windy weekend, and I always say, how was it out there? How was your day on the water? And some of the sailors I know who have been at it forever, even their entire lives, might say something like, it was a good day and we didn't break anything, or it was a good day and we only broke blank and blank and blank, but we didn't break any of the crew members, so we'll go back out again, that. So I think that that's a sign of a good day.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions coming in from our crowd tonight. They're on the quieter side. We're really glad you joined us tonight on the SpinSheet Happy Hour. Kristen, is there anything you want to tell us about you, how anyone can reach out to you, anything you have on your plans that we should know about?
Yeah, it's the start of the winter season, so I'll be heading to Florida and doing some sailing and coaching down there. If anybody wants to get out of the chilly, mid-Atlantic and come sailing in Florida, reach out to me. I'm easy to find at galeforsailing.com and Davis's Pub. So, it's not hard to track me down. Anytime after 11:30, you could probably find me there. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's 78 degrees here right now, so I hope that doesn't hurt your business.
No, I was out sailing today. We had the most incredible November 1st sailing day I can ever remember. It was just epic, windy and fun. We were trading tacks with Terry Hutchinson. You can only do that in Annapolis. I mean, that is so cool. Right?
That's an Annapolis moment right there.
There's just, hey, we're out here sailing against this knucklehead over here. Do you know who that knucklehead is? Like, unbelievably cool, right? Like, what a neat moment.
That's super.
That's super cool.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you're getting out there, and we're always happy to have you on the show, sharing all of your vast knowledge and your great sense of humor about it. And we didn't even make fun of you for going overboard.
Right. I can't believe we didn't get to that story, but yeah, I did go swimming recently. My first time ever actually falling off a boat. So
Well, I'm really glad that you didn't get hurt, and it was just a funny story in the end. And it happens to the best of us, apparently.
apparently, yeah.
All right. Well, we're not sure exactly when the next Spin Sheet Happy Hour will be, but I hope you guys will follow along on Facebook and YouTube, and of course in the magazine. And make sure to go read the Sail Faster bit and read Biddy Cafo's article this month. The November issue is out on the docks, and we hope to see you soon on the Spin Sheet Happy Hour and elsewhere. Thanks for being here, Kristen. Thank you, Shar, for putting it all together.
It's great
Thanks
to
for
be
having
back.
me.
Thank you, friends. We'll see you soon.
All right.
See you soon.
See you later.
Good night.
Good night.